Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. We are less than 20 days away from kickoff of the 2023 season, and we are continuing the countdown to kickoff here on the show today. We are going to talk about Purdue's defense. Ryan Walters' success as a defensive coordinator is what got him to the spot as Purdue's new head coach, and he brings his unique defensive style to Purdue. Today on the show, we're going to talk about the airstrike defense and how Purdue's personnel could work in it here today. Real quick, if you don't already, be sure to follow the show on Twitter or X, whatever you call it now, at Boilers Beyond. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Boilers and Beyond, available anywhere. And feel free, shoot me a DM, shoot me an email, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Let me know what you want to talk about. Let me know what you thought of the week's episode, what you want me to talk about in the future. Always open. You know, we do this show for you. So please reach out however you prefer to. But today we're going to talk about the airstrike defense. And that's, you know, the little moniker that Ryan Walters has developed since he arrived at Purdue. I don't remember really hearing the term airstrike from his time at Illinois. Maybe I'm wrong. I certainly do not follow the Illini as closely as I follow Purdue. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of the moniker he's going with here. And Purdue's really leaning in to the air raid offense, which we're going to talk about next week, and the airstrike defense, which we're going to talk about today. And, you know, it's interesting. It's Ryan Walters' unique creation. He doesn't like to go into great detail on it. It's not really a 3-4. Not a 3-3-5. It's not a 4-3. It's Ryan Walters' own unique defense. You know, at times it can look like a 5-1-5 a bit, but that's not truly what it is. It's interesting. And, you know, I had many people ask about the term airstrike. Look, it's meant to create havoc. That's the goal here. Purdue wants to get after the passer. Purdue wants to get in the backfield on every snap, whether it's a run play, stuff it quick, keep the offense behind the chains, and then when you get into those third and long passing situations, you go get the quarterback and you force turnovers, you force sacks, you force early throws where, you know, the quarterback's got to get it out too early, the receiver's not ready, and you get the ball back. That's ultimately what the goal of the airstrike defense is. Purdue brings back a few starters from last year's defense, which did fairly well. Last year's defense was a bit of a mixed bag at times, but as a whole, it was a fine defense for Purdue, fairly solid over the last 2 years. Largely a new crew this year. Corey Trice, Jalen Graham, both of those guys had eligibility remaining, but decided to head out early to the NFL draft. I believe Trice had eligibility remaining. I know Graham did. Jack Sullivan, Branson Dean, Lawrence Johnson, those guys all transferred. They are going to be playing roles on pretty prominent programs this fall. After spring practices, Jacob Wahlberg transferred. He got a lot of action at linebacker last year. He bounced, headed to Western Michigan. So a lot of new faces here. And you know, if you're not familiar, if this is your first season listening to Boilers and Beyond here, we like to go through every position group before the season. Talk about what it's going to look like, talk about the players. You know, here it's going to look different on the defensive line. Purdue's going to have 3 down defensive linemen normally. They're going to have a nose, a defensive tackle, and a defensive end. And what I'll say up front here is I do not have a great feel for where specific guys are going to line up. I know the coaching staff has talked a little bit about where guys are lining up, but, you know, I think to a certain degree, it could be a little bit interchangeable. We're going to look at a number of players here who are going to play a key role in the defensive front. And the one thing that's interesting to me is that Purdue, on its official roster, lists these guys all as defensive linemen. They're not categorized as tackles or ends. They're all just listed as defensive linemen. So I thought that was a little interesting. Kicking it off, though, probably the guy who has drawn the most praise coming into this season is Jeffrey Emba. 3 SEC transfers on this defensive line alone from last year to this year, and he's an interesting one. Started at Independence Community College. If you've heard of that, probably from Last Chance U, the Netflix show. He was there, then spent a year at Auburn, where he didn't get a ton of action. He looked solid when he got out there. Auburn had its own problems last year, without a doubt. They didn't really want to lose him, though. Folks on the Plains were not happy when Emba hopped in the portal. Massive, massive guy. 6'6", 315 pounds. When you look at this defensive line, he's the guy I'm most excited to see. We're keeping the outside linebackers out of this because, we'll get to Nick Scourton later. He's the guy I'm most excited about. But very excited to see what Emba can do. He's a guy who I think could make a huge difference. The other 2 SEC guys, Isaiah Nichols from Arkansas, Malik Langham from Vanderbilt. Both of these guys are 6th-year transfers, so they bring a wealth of experience with them. They saw snaps at their former schools, but they were not, every game starters. At absolute minimum, they're going to bring some experience depth, and that is absolutely huge to have on both sides of the line of scrimmage. And at best, they get a change of scenery, and they're Big Ten caliber starters. There's no doubt. The best play on the line of scrimmage tends to be in the SEC, and if they can kind of bring some of that ability to the Big Ten, we'll see what happens. But I think really, when you look at those 3 transfers, it's going to be interesting to see how quickly can guys beat them out, because ultimately, 6th-year guys, can the young guys go get them? At least with Nichols and Langham. Emba, I think, is going to be really good. But, there are plenty of returners as well. Suleiman Kapaka has increased his role every year at Purdue. He's going to be in that mix. He'll be at a tackle spot, whether he's at nose or, an off-ball defensive tackle a little bit. We'll see. Cole Brevard will probably play the nose, I would think. He's a real big guy. Transferred in from Penn State after last year, or ahead of last season, excuse me. Looked pretty good. Got limited snaps, but looked pretty good. I think he may be able to vault up into a starting role this year. Moa Monade was a true freshman out of West Lafayette High School last year. He saw some good reps. I think I saw he got 100 snaps last season. That's pretty good for a true freshman. That's legitimate experience. DeMar J. Lewis as well is a name to keep an eye on. He had an interesting interview. All these post-practice interviews they do are, available for public consumption. Tom over at Golden Black gets those posted on YouTube. You can always find those there. And he was really interesting to hear talk, because he discussed how, he put it very bluntly, guys are getting cut. And he was worried that he was going to get cut coming off an injury. He flashed in 2021, if we're being honest here. He was just a redshirt freshman that year, I believe, and he looked really solid playing a bit of a limited role on a good defensive line. Is he able to kind of come back off that injury and be a contributor this year? He's a guy I'm really interested to see, number 34 in your programs. And then, there are some guys, too, who are on the roster. The names. They haven't quite, done anything yet, but they could. Prince Boyd probably should have been in that past category. A guy who played snaps last year, a big body to eat up space in there. You've got Joe Strickland and J.P. Dieter, both guys coming off a red shirt there. Strickland was a big recruiting win. Man, it's funny how quick things change, but I remember, the summer of 2021 when Indiana was on fire coming off that good COVID year. And it felt like Purdue getting Joe Strickland was a really big win. He's there. Can he kind of get on the field as a redshirt freshman and carve out a role at defensive end? We'll see. Dieter probably more at tackle. Joe Anderson, a South Carolina transfer from a couple years ago now. He's been on the roster for a while. He had a big play in the spring game in, that would have been April of 2022, but he's been pretty quiet. It's now or never for him. I think he's in his last year. When you look at this defensive line group, you have a lot of guys who are probably serviceable, but who can make that huge difference? I think Mba is probably the best bet, but Purdue needs these guys who have been in the program to take leaps. Can Brevard take that leap? Can Suleiman Kapaka take that leap? How about Moa Monade or DeMarje Lewis? Where can these guys stack up? Can they become more than just a guy? Become more than just serviceable? That's going to go a long way here because Purdue needs the interior of the defensive line to hold its own because it has the potential to have something really special at outside linebacker. Now, with the way Ryan Walters structures his defense, and this is just audio, so I can't really show a diagram or anything, but it's almost like there are 5 guys on the line of scrimmage a lot of times. You've got the 3 down linemen, and then you have 2 outside linebackers lined up across from the tackles on the edge. At times, they'll drop into coverage from there, but a lot of times they're going to go get after the passer, and I think the outside linebacker spot might be the deepest part of this Purdue team as a whole, not just the defense. You've got 2 of them on the field at the same time. It's really important that you get good play here. You know how important edge rushers are in modern football. As the game develops into more of a passing game, it's critical to have guys who can get after the passer. Now, I'd argue the Big Ten West might not be the best example of that, but nonetheless, you want to be able to get after the passer. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, look, Nick Scourton, formerly Nick Carraway, as you may remember him, changed his last name between last season and now. He's my pick to become a legitimate superstar on this team. He earned a third-place vote for Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year at Media Days from the Cleveland.com poll. Don't know who did that. That might be a step too far, but I think he could be absolutely fantastic. You remember how much of a rise he took in the recruiting rankings during his senior year, had a big performance at the All-American Bowl, and he parlayed that into a nice freshman season. This is the year where he really takes off. I am very, very interested to hear him, and when you've heard what he's had to say at media availability so far, the guy has all the confidence in the world. He's a guy I can't wait to watch. Corday Sidnor is another really interesting one. He kind of quietly had 4.5 sacks last year, just one off the team lead. He was really solid. He's really good. He's got a 7-foot wingspan. I mean, the guy is massive. Now in his 3rd year, that's kind of when sometimes you see these guys start to take off. Those guys who redshirted as a true freshman, then they get a year under their belt with some experience. Now he's in his 3rd year. I think he could really break out and become more of a household name for Purdue fans. He's got a really high ceiling. Scourton and Sidnor, really high ceilings for both of them. Kydron Jenkins is rock solid. He's a guy with 10 sacks to his name at Purdue. The best stat. Kydron Jenkins tied George Karlaftis for the lead on the team in sacks in 2021. He's been a really nice, kind of steady force for Purdue over the last 2 years. He's rock solid. He's a known commodity. You like having him in the fold. How about Scotty Humpick? A guy who transferred in from Louisville, he's from Louisville, went to Murray State, transferred in from Murray State ahead of last season, and there was reason to be pretty excited for him. Didn't really click. He didn't produce much last year, but it's a fresh start here. Will Helt, Roman Petrie, a couple of freshmen. Petrie redshirted last year. Helt's the true freshman from Carmel. I think Helt could be one of those guys who, if someone's going to get on the field as a true freshman, he may do it here in this group. Joe Deneen, the position coach, he's got a really solid group of outside linebackers here. I'm excited to see what they can do. When you look at the inside linebacker spot, though, it's kind of the complete opposite. This is a system, this is a defensive scheme that doesn't rely on inside linebackers a tremendous amount. It is much more defensive front, outside linebacker, and secondary based. But you got to have guys at inside linebacker who can play. O.C. Brothers started last year. He's a known commodity, third year at Purdue, former Auburn transfer. I think his sideline to sideline lateral ability is really going to help him here. I think that could be a really big positive, a way that this defense could suit him pretty well. Got to shore up the missed tackles a little bit. That plagued him last year at times. I remember a couple of bad ones against Syracuse. But he's going to be the leader of this group because past him, Clyde Washington has played a little bit of linebacker at Purdue. Limited experience for sure. Kind of got jumped by Wahlberg on the depth chart last year. But Clyde Washington's probably your number 2 guy. And then Yanni Karlaftis slots in there. I had a question about him on Twitter. This is his role. He's bounced from inside linebacker to defensive end to outside linebacker. This is where he's settling, it seems. He's going to be an inside linebacker. You almost feel bad for him. The expectations were awfully high based on his brother's name. It almost feels like a now or never. He's obviously got 2 more years of eligibility left after this, so it's not. But you'd like to see him get on the field, find a real defensive role more than just special teams. This is a thin unit. Dominic Moon redshirted last year. He's in this group. It's thin. What Purdue does here is going to be interesting to see because, a lot of times I have a decent feel for with the roster what they can do. I don't have a great feel for the linebacker unit at all if injuries come into play or if it's just ineffective. I don't know what Purdue does there. On the back end of this defense, kind of the same deal as the linebacker crew. You have one pretty proven group at the safety spot. You return both starters, Cam Allen, Sanusi Kane. Cam Allen's a veteran. He's a 3-year starter, and he's had some ups and downs throughout his career. Now, that's natural. Very few 3-year starters don't have their ups and downs. But, last season he struggled with missed tackles. That really kind of showed. Not ideal, obviously, not at safety, but he's someone who's had some big moments in his career. You think about his 2 interceptions at Minnesota last year, pick 6 against Indiana State. He's had some big moments. He's a guy who came back, used his COVID year to play one more year at Purdue. Can he finish strong? Put together a nice year to round out his career at Purdue. That's going to be a storyline to watch. Sanusi Kane put together a real nice year last year. He moved into a starting role early on when Chris Jefferson left the team, played some nickelback, kind of a weird situation there, but Kane put a nice year together last year. He led Purdue in tackles. He's more of a thumper than a ball hawk. He's going to come downhill and make tackles. He's going to be really active. He's a guy who I'm excited to see. And then you've got some interesting pieces. Anthony Brown transferred in from Arkansas. He was a pretty well-regarded recruit, if I'm remembering correctly. He's young, only in his 2nd or 3rd season of college football. Dylan Thieneman has been drawing some really strong reviews early on in camp. True freshman out of Westfield. Obviously, the last name Thieneman. Very familiar to Purdue fans at safety. I think you feel pretty good about the safety spot. But at corner, I don't know that you do. Who's going to start? That's kind of the big question. Jamari Brown is your lone returner who has some experience. He was the number 2 corner last year, and he was solid. Had some good moments, had some bad moments. Corey Trice was the clear number 1. Is Jamari Brown capable of being that alpha number one corner who, you stick against the opposing team's best receiver and say, you're going to hold him under 50 yards today. I don't know. We'll find out. If he's not, Purdue brought in a bevy of transfers to compete for that spot. Marquise Wilson is probably the guy I'm highest on. We've talked about him throughout the summer a bit. Fifth-year transfer from Penn State, former four-star recruit who just never quite could crack that starting rotation at Penn State. They've had a really good secondary over the last few years, so it's not like he was getting beaten out by some bums. He's been getting beat out by NFL draft picks. Can he step in and be that starter right away? Salim Turner-Muhammad, sounds like he's been off the field a little bit, been hurt to start training camp, but he's another guy. I think he's in his fourth year transferring from Stanford. Can he get in there when he's healthy? Markevius Brown and Braxton Myers, both transferring from Ole Miss. Myers is real young. Brown's more experienced, but where do they line up? How about Botros Alessandro, a late junior college addition to this class? He seems to be off to a good start. So there are options here. Purdue has options. The one thing I'll note, some of these guys are older, but they don't have a ton of game experience. Jamari Brown certainly does. There's no doubt about that. He's played a lot for Purdue over the 2 seasons he's been in West Lafayette. Marquise Wilson started 2 games for Penn State. Out at Stanford, Salim Turner-Muhammad started 6. Ole Miss's record books on its online site are a little different, but I don't know that Markevius Brown started any games there. Braxton Myers didn't. Alessandro's a JUCO guy. And then, there are some guys who Purdue has returning and some true freshmen, but no experience to speak of there. For Ryan Walters' defense to play the style that it did last year and that made Illinois' defense one of the nation's best, the corners need to be real solid. It helps that he had Devin Witherspoon, a top 5 NFL draft pick. He's not in this corner room. There's not a guy of that ilk at Purdue this year. In Walter's perfect world, it's a lot of man, a lot of cover 1, cover 0. Not a ton of help on the back end in his ideal world. He puts a lot on his corners. Can these guys go do that? Now, Purdue's not going to face a murderer's row of quarterbacks either. They're not going to go face the AFC with Mahomes and Burrow and Herbert and all of those guys. Not quite the case, but Purdue still needs its corners to step up and play. And I think there are a lot more questions than answers going into this season at that group. Just some thoughts as a whole about this defense. I'm going to talk special teams as well, and got a couple of good questions to touch on. But, Purdue had a good enough defense last year. It kept them in games. And with what Purdue's offense was designed to be, that was kind of all you needed. The real philosophy of Purdue's program over the last 6 years was offense first, offense heavy. The offense will lead the way. I think the pass rush could be really solid. If the interior of the D-line holds up and you're getting exclusively one-on-one matchups for those outside linebackers, that could be awesome for Purdue. They've got guys who could really exploit that. How effectively can Purdue stop the run, though? Because you don't have the traditional linebacker play, in the middle. You don't have that Mike who's going to come down and be a thumper. I don't know that O.C. Brothers is that. Clyde Washington, Yanni Karlaftis, I don't think so. If Purdue can stop the run, though, you're asking a lot less of your secondary because you're putting them in favorable positions, 3rd and long, 3rd and medium, where the pass rush can go be effective. If it's 3rd and short all the time, 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, and you can't stop the run, or, a quick slant, quick out is going to do it, then, get something in the flat, it's going to do it. I don't know that's going to ask a lot of Purdue's secondary. I'm going to be worried about that corner room until it's proven otherwise. There are a lot of bodies there. And to start the year, injuries will happen, but to start the year, if Purdue can get 3 guys out there who can play, that's all the better. You do need 3. You're going to play the slot corner a lot, the nickel back, whatever term you want to use for it. You're going to have 5 defensive backs out there a lot. Secondary is going to be big. There was a question on Twitter just about how much Purdue relied on the portal on this defense. And, look, I don't think it's ever ideal to come into a season looking to rely on transfers as much as this defense is. 5 of your top 6 DBs are transfers, and I don't know on the defensive line, but it's quite possible that 3 of your top 4 or 5 guys are transfers. I really have no clue there. We'll find out, but long term, you can't rely on the portal this much. For this year, you did what you had to do. You had to hit the portal hard. Ryan Walters did. There's only so much you can do when you hit the portal this hard, though. You can only shop what's in the portal, and we'll find out how effectively Purdue filled these holes. I don't think anything that happens this year will be an indictment on Ryan Walters as a defensive mind or on Kevin Kane as a defensive play caller. I don't think that's the case, but what we've got to see is, can the X's and O's overcome a lack of proven Jimmies and Joes? Or, on the flip side, did the portal provide some legit Jimmies and Joes that can help Purdue, compete for bowl games and, in the top half of the West? We're going to find out pretty soon. I had a question about the defense here before we get into special teams that was a good one. From our longtime listeners, the Mackey Maniacs. Who's the most important player on the defense this year? And he said not necessarily the best, but someone that needs to be good to great for the defense to outperform expectations. Look, if you've probably picked up on the theme, if I could just say all of the cornerbacks, I probably would. With how much Purdue wants to play one-on-one, the cornerback room is huge. Whether it's Jamari Brown, whether it's Marquise Wilson, whether it's Markevius Brown, Botros Alessandro, Purdue needs a couple of those guys to step up and be legitimate Big Ten starting corners. A couple others to point to, O.C. Brothers, a veteran guy who, although linebacker isn't the most important spot on Ryan Walters' defense, someone's got to play it. And he's the most equipped to play it well. Can he wrap up his career strong? Emba on the defensive line, can he be a real difference maker there? I don't know. Cam Allen's had his ups and downs, but can he be that veteran presence on the back end and really, this is going to sound like the worst analogy ever, but it's like David Ross to the 2016 Cubs. Can he be that veteran presence to this young this young cornerback room and this young secondary, and kind of be the guy who guides them through? That's where I'd go there, but a lot of guys need to step up. Certainly, at the outside linebacker spot, I think Scourton and Sidnor are going to take big steps. You need them to. You need them to be big difference makers. So to answer your question, almost everybody. No, those are a few names, though. Over on the special teams, gone is Mitchell Finneran, the most accurate kicker in Purdue history. We talked about him a lot last year. He was nearly flawless from 40 and in during his Purdue career, but he was limited in terms of range. Outside of 40 yards, he was not a reliable kicker. That isn't to say he was bad. He certainly wasn't. He was a valuable asset to Purdue. Ben Freehill appears to be the replacement. He's been in the program for a couple years now. I think he came before 2021 by way of Oklahoma State. He's been a kickoff guy for Purdue. So in theory, I think he's got a bigger leg than Finneran, But how's the accuracy? How reliable can he be? And what is that range where you're comfortable sending him out? That is the biggest question that doesn't get talked about much as it pertains to, game management, is how do you call plays when you're nearing that target yard line for your field goal kicker? What's that number? Can he, it's the yard line plus 17. So do you need to get the ball to the 30 for a 47-yarder? Do you need to get it to the 25 for a 42-yarder? That's a key thing for Purdue to know here. If he can't do it, you've got Julio Macias, a product of good old Noble County, Indiana, back up north. Big guy, 6'5" kicker. And then you've got Crockover as well, Caleb Crockover, a local product from West Lafayette. On the other side, Jack Ansel took a step forward from 2021 to 2022. 21, he really struggled. 22, he was solid. This year, can he kind of take that next level and be a real good punter for you? That's going to be interesting to watch. He's developed from year 1 to year 2. See if he can take another step forward. And then we get into everyone's favorite conversation, the good old Purdue return game. Purdue has not returned a kickoff for a touchdown since 2013. Purdue has not returned a punt for a touchdown since 2009. Coming into last year, we thought Charlie Jones would be a big difference maker. He didn't end up being one because Purdue didn't send him out much. Purdue was utterly terrified of getting him hurt. Very good reason on that. I agree. That was the right move, to say the least. But who's going to do it this year? Can someone be that difference maker? TJ Sheffield might be in that same boat. He's the most proven receiver coming back. Is he your number one? I don't know. But if he's too important at receiver to risk getting hurt on special teams, then you've got yourself an issue there. I've got no clue who's going to run back the kickoffs. I've heard a few walk-ons getting some looks there as well. Sawinski has fielded some punts. Andrew Sawinski, definitely more of a play it safe guy, but you'd rather just catch the ball than risk fumbles all the time. Going to be interesting on the special teams this year. Purdue does not have a true special teams coordinator, I believe. Believe that's right. Don't quote me 100% on that, but I believe they have an analyst to help with special teams, but not an actual on-field special teams coach. So that's something to watch as well. And then a good question from a longtime listener that I wanted to close the show out with. Wesley tweeted to me and asked, without using win-loss records as kind of the rationale, how, in your opinion, is success going to be measured for this year's team? And on the flip side, how would failure be measured with this year's team? I think that's a good question, and that's something I'll talk about here more on our last episode before kickoff, is when I give my annual win-loss prediction. But this is a good conversation to have. If you're in the gambling world, Purdue's over-under is 5 or 5.5 wins. It depends where you look. I'm pulling up a site right now. I'll talk as I do this. But, at the end of the day, this isn't a Purdue team that is projected to be, a Big Ten West contender, to say the least. This isn't, this is the same team that won the Big Ten West last year, but it kind of isn't, DraftKings has it at 5.5. The under is minus 165. So, very likely in Vegas's eyes that Purdue goes under 5.5 wins. If Purdue can get to a bowl game, that's a massive success this year. I think the best way to measure success for Purdue this year is to see, A, what the coaching staff looks like and how the coaching staff handles the season. there's an adjustment when you have a coaching staff that's this young. Ryan Walters is coaching games as a head coach for the first time. And there are a lot of different things that come with that he's not experienced before. And really, there's no way to prepare. You can play all the NCAA 14 dynasty mode you want. There's nothing like the real thing for him to go out and get live bullets at managing games. But, how do the ups and downs of a season go? If Purdue's lost a couple games in a row, how's Ryan Walters with the media? Is it clearly getting to him? Is the team really looking tight, looking panicked? Or, is it kind of a cool, calm, confident, one game at a time bunch? Jeff Brom had his ups and downs, but the one thing you can say about him, his team really embodied the one-game season mantra. They had a lot of ups and downs, but you never knew what was coming next. That team was never out until it was out of a season. I think you want to see Purdue, in terms of success or failure, how does Purdue stack up to some of its peers in the Big Ten? And, I think Virginia Tech and Syracuse, even in the non-con, are programs that you'd like to measure yourself against too. But in the Big Ten, I'm less concerned about Wisconsin and Iowa because I think they are a clear-cut top two in the Big Ten West. And over the past 10 years, they clearly have been the top two in the Big Ten West. I'm more concerned about, how does Purdue stack up with Illinois? How does Purdue stack up with Minnesota and Nebraska? Does Purdue beat Northwestern and take care of business against a program that's in disarray? Obviously, Indiana is always your top measuring stick, but I think that's the best way to gauge it. I think also you can look at it from this lens. It's a different scheme, and Ryan Walters doesn't inherit a ton of proven production from, guys who we know. That's a talented dude. There's not a ton of just raw talent on this roster. So, at times are we saying, man, if Purdue just had a little bit more athleticism there, or man, if they were just a little better here, I think that's a good sign. If everything is looking good and the ability just isn't there, I think that's a good sign. Or are we saying, man, this offense isn't working. This air raid, whatever it is, Purdue's not air raiding. The run game's not getting much. Offensive line's not looking great. Then, I think you start to worry about it. But I think when you look long term, Purdue's off to a really good start recruiting under Ryan Walters. Now you just have to kind of demonstrate some proof of concept. That's the ultimate success point here, right? Recruiting's the lifeblood of a program. You're doing that, but you have to back up the recruiting with on-field results to propel that forward to start stacking good classes. That's going to be the key for Purdue this year, is to have that proof of concept on field and to show that this air raid, airstrike philosophy can be effective. Great question, though. I really appreciate that. Next week, we're going to be talking offense here on the show. You can start sending questions in now on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond, via email, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Whichever way you like, I'm all ears. I look forward to hearing from you all. And thank you to those of you who have been interactive lately. I always enjoy it. That's all I've got for today, though. Thank you for listening to me talk about the airstrike defense. Going to be fascinating to see what it looks like this year. Be sure to follow on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond, and be sure to subscribe. We are ever so closer to the season. I cannot wait to get there. 19 days away when you listen to this on Monday, maybe even less if you're listening later in the week. We're almost there, folks. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. I'll be back next week to talk about that offense, but until then, take care, everybody.